one of the most interesting presentations of the day. Imagine a Japanese boy in Japan is a painter in school. He decides at age 16 to say he wants to go to France and become a high schooler in France. Okay? He convinces the ambassador to Japan, from France to Japan, to let him go to Paris. He lands up there not knowing one word of French. And he graduates from high school in Paris. And after that, gets into linguistics, learns a lot of languages. Then he has a love for math. So he gets a PhD in mathematics from the UK and becomes a professor of mathematics. I saw him in the context of Ramanujan, the famous Indian mathematician who went to Cambridge, and the rest is history. But one of our Indiaspora friends, Ramji from Agastya, has taken it upon himself to put Ramanujan's statue in key universities around the world. Started with Cambridge. We then did an installation at MIT, more recently at Stanford. It was at Stanford I met Tadashi, and he was this most incredible guy in presenting the story of Ramanujan, right? But the fun fact about him is he's also, as some of you noticed, a magician. So please welcome Tadashi to tell Ramanujan's story to us. Tadashi.
Okay. Good. Ladies and gentlemen, I shall not detain you long, as we say. This is the story of Ramanujan, and is it going to, yeah? Nope. I'd like to see if the clicker advances. It's advancing with a lot of delay, is that right? Okay. So, yeah. Okay, so you know very well southern India. It's a southern tip of India, and that's the land of Ramanujan. So he was born in Erode in 1887, December the 22nd, and you see that at the towards the bottom of this larger map. And also of relevance is the town of Kumbakonam, where he died, but also where he studied, which you see in the lower right corner. And no less important is the town of Namakkal, which will come up. He also went up to Chennai, in those days Madras, in the top right corner of the page. So this is the land in which he evolved and did wonders. I would like to invite your attention to the top right corner of the screen, green thing which says countdown. This is, at any moment in this biographical sketch of Ramanujan, the percentage of the number of years that Ramanujan has left in his life. Okay, so that's the countdown. He was born in 1887, and so he still has 100% of his life. And we shall count down from there. He was a Tamil Brahmin Iyengar, as many of you know. His father was a clerk in sari shop, very, very modest, but a very proud person. And mother was a housewife. And he had 3 younger siblings, but unfortunately all of them died before their first birthdays. And then he studied in Kumbakonam. And he was a very competent student, competent enough to earn a scholarship to Government Arts College in Kumbakonam. And please note that by age 17, when he finished secondary school, he has only 50% of his life left at this stage. Okay? Then he has a fateful encounter with a book. In 1903, so this is a year before he graduates from the high school, local school, he got hold of Card's synopsis. And this started him in private research in mathematics. Here is a copy of synopsis, which is in the University of California system. And this is really a compilation of an abundance of theorems and formulas that were relevant for the first year studies in mathematics at Cambridge University and notorious mathematical typos. Very, very few proofs and just oodles and oodles of results. I actually worked with the Cambridge University Press to have it reprinted. So now a modern edition, a very clean up version, is available in perpetuity on demand at any time for something like £20. So it's available if you want to look what it is. So he starts doing mathematics a little too assiduously and suffers a series of setbacks. First, he's so obsessed with mathematics that he does not study properly other subjects, and so his scholarship is terminated for the second year. And instead of trying to save the situation, what does he do? He runs away. So he loses his place at the Government Arts College. And then he comes back at some point and tries an external examination called the First Arts Examination, which was common in those days, to enter the University of Madras. He would have been able to enter, except that he failed this examination twice. And he had repeated illnesses and an operation in 1909, and the convalescence is rather slow. By this time, he has only 36% of his life left. Okay. And in 1909, he married Yanaki. And this lady, one of my colleagues at Stanford University, the greatest analytic number theorist of our age, Sundararajan, met her actually when he was a young boy. And so they lived in poverty. That's what she looked like. And she outlived Ramanujan by a long, long time later on. Then in 1912, not really having anything else that he could do, Ramanujan became an accounts clerk of Madras Port Trust. So by this time, he has only 25% of his life left. Notice that in societal terms, he hasn't gotten anywhere yet. Nowhere at all, and he has only 1/4 of his life left. And he was earning at that time £30 a year. Adjusted for inflation in today's money, this is $6,000 a year. You can imagine. And then he starts to write to English mathematicians. Yeah, those were the colonial times. And so he writes to some of the grandees of the British mathematics of the time, to Hill, from which he received a very, very lukewarm reply, to Hobson and Baker. These were also great sort of influences, but they sent absolutely no reply. And then he writes to G.H. Hardy, one of the two greatest English mathematicians of the time, and one of the leading mathematicians of the world at that time. This is Hardy describing what happened when Ramanujan's letter, a thick envelope, arrived at Trinity College, Cambridge that day, fateful day. It's after C.P. Snow, but I rewrote the whole thing. One winter morning in 1913 at Trinity College, Hardy found, among letters on his breakfast table, a large untidy envelope with Indian stamps. In it, sheets of paper on which were line after line of formulas. He felt irritated. World-famous mathematicians like he are exposed to cranks. He glanced at the letter, written in halting English, signed by an unknown Indian, asking him to give an opinion of these mathematical discoveries. Some of the formulas looked familiar. Others were baffling. Most of them wild-looking. There were no proofs of any kind. It seemed like a curious kind of fraud. He put the manuscript aside and went on with his day's routine. That day, while the routine wasn't altered, at the back of his mind, an Indian manuscript nagged away wild formulas, such as he had never seen before, nor imagined. A question formed itself in his mind. Which is more improbable, a fraudster of incredible skill or an unknown great mathematician? In the evening in Trinity, he had another look at the script. He sent word to Littlewood, that's the other of the greatest mathematicians in England at the time, that they must have a discussion after dinner. By 9 p.m. or so, they were in Hardy's rooms with a manuscript stretched out in front of them. That is an occasion at which one would like to have been present. Hardy, with his combination of remorseless clarity and intellectual panache. Littlewood, imaginative, powerful, humorous. It did not take them long. Before midnight, so they worked for 3 hours, they knew for certain. The writer of these manuscripts was a great mathematician. The following day, Hardy went into action. Ramanujan must be brought to England. So this was achieved, and by this time he has only 19% of his life left, less than 20%. In 1914, he sailed to England, and this was helped by two people, Neville, who had tight connections with India and also Cambridge, and also Goddess of Namagiri, who, and you see this photograph, which is a temple at Namakkal, and where Ramanujan's family went to worship often. And so Hardy and he had an intense work collaborations from that time onward. And 1914 to 18, unfortunately, World War I, Ramanujan fell very ill, and he was confined to a sanatorium. And he was diagnosed at the time as with tuberculosis, and you'll see this in many biographical sketches, but actually modern study says that he was rather more probably amoebic dysentery of liver. In 1916, he's given a BA by research. This is kind of a precursor to PhD by dissertation, and by this time, Ramanujan has only 12% left of his life. Okay. And 1917, he attempted suicide on London Underground subway track. 1918, he's elected a Fellow of the Royal Society. So this is the British equivalent of the National Academy of Sciences. And he was the second Indian to be so honored in history after Adraser Kutseji in 1841. He was a naval engineer. And then, in the same year, he was elected a fellowship to Trinity College. This is, if you like, a tenured professorship in that time in Cambridge. And he was the first Indian ever. By the way, there is a small story that I cannot resist telling. So when he was being proposed by Hardy and Littlewood for a fellowship of Trinity, many people were against him. You know, there were people who were saying, the current fellows of the time, we're not going to have a black man as a fellow. Or they expressed some doubts about his mental sanity, and so on and so on. And so they were saying that they were very careful. You see, the Hardy and Littlewood were very strategic. They had him elected a Fellow of the Royal Society first. So they went around saying, but you cannot reject an FRS. And the opponent said, yes, we thought that was a rather dirty trick. Anyway, he was elected. Okay. So in 1919, he sails back to India finally, and he has only 3% of his life left at that time. And in 1920, he passes away. Countdown is down to 0. Here is a very famous anecdote from Hardy, which shows one aspect of Ramanujan, and I'd like to emphasize the other and the main part of Ramanujan in a moment. But first, the one aspect of Ramanujan. Ramanujan was lying ill in Putney, that's a suburb of London. Meaning Hardy, I had ridden a taxi cab number 1729, 1729, 1729, and remarked that the number seemed to be a rather dull one, and that I hoped that it was not an unfavorable omen. No, Ramanujan replied, it is a very interesting number. It is the smallest number expressible as a sum of two cubes in two different ways, and here's how. 1729 equals 12 cubed plus 1 cubed, or it is also equal to 10 cubed plus 9 cubed. So naturally, Hardy asked him whether he could tell him the solution of the corresponding problem for fourth powers. And he replied, after a moment's thought, that he knew no obvious example and supposed that the first such number must be very large. This number was actually known to Euler in the 18th century, another sort of, if you like, a peer of Ramanujan's in this kind of thing. I cannot possibly read this number, 63531865. And you can see that it is a sum of fourth powers in two different ways. Okay. So it was J. Littlewood, we already mentioned him, who said that every positive integer was one of Ramanujan's personal friends, indeed. Okay. Now, the second aspect of Ramanujan's, as I said, he wrote quite a lot of papers. I shall come back to that. But I would like to really emphasize one thing, which is emphasized by Hardy. So here's, again, Hardy speaking. There's quite enough about Ramanujan that is difficult to understand. And we tend to mystify, we tend to worship, we tend to think of him as some kind of a god in human form. But there is quite enough about Ramanujan that is difficult to understand. And we have no need to go out of our way to manufacture mystery. For myself, I liked and admired him enough to wish to be a rationalist about him. And I want to make it quite clear to you that Ramanujan, when he was living in good health and comfortable surroundings, was as reasonable, as sane, and in his way, as shrewd a person as anyone else, like all of us, like you. Okay. The last thing which I want you to do is to throw up your hands and exclaim, here's something unintelligible, some mysterious manifestation of the immemorial wisdom of the Orient. The picture which I wanted to present to you is that of a man who had his peculiarities like other distinguished people, but a man in whose society one could take pleasure, with whom one could drink tea and discuss politics or mathematics. The picture, in short, not of an alien wonder or an inspired idiot or psychological freak, but of a rational human being who happened to be a great mathematician. And so you see those photos of Ramanujan, and they are, as far as I know, practically all the extant photos of Ramanujan. So you have the entire collection, and you see some of them are haunting, and some of them are sort of cheerful, some of them are forward-looking. In the lower left corner, you see the photograph from his matriculation ceremony at Cambridge, and at the right end of that photo is Hardy standing, and Ramanujan is the man in the middle, yeah, rather shorter than the others. And I'd like to emphasize that the, when we think about a public figure or historical figure indeed like Ramanujan and lesser people, we always kind of objectify him. And we see his eyes, yes, from the outside. We are looking at his eyes from the outside, all those eyes that you see. But let's remember that there was actually a human being at that time, now gone, who was looking outside through those eyes, yeah, from the inside. There was a human behind those eyes. Okay. Some bibliographical guidance. G.H. Hardy wrote a very beautiful collection of essays called Ramanujan, 12 lectures on subjects suggested by his life and work. Most of it is mathematical, but there's a beginning which is very biographical and worth reading. And then also Berendt and Rankin, who are the modern kind of researchers on Ramanujan, published Ramanujan letters and commentaries. So those are the voluminous letters that he exchanged with Hardy and other people, and which was published not long ago. And also, last not least, the collected papers of Srinivasa Ramanujan. So this is all his mathematical work that output. And it is very, very difficult to read, but it has been annotated and somewhat. So anyway, so the biographical notices therein by Sheshu Iyer, Ramachandra Rao, those are the Indian friends of Ramanujan's, and also Hardy, in sharp contrast in style and in content, but they are both repay scrutiny. And I would like to come back to what I promised. So we note how prolifically Ramanujan worked. So he had 10 papers, or rather, let's count the number of pages, published pages, 50 pages from India over 4 years, which is kind of powerful working mathematician in his prime, but also 27 papers, 207 pages from England over 3 years. That's really a lot. So in pure mathematics, we are lucky to publish maybe 10, 20 pages per year, and this is an order of magnitude larger. And that's how he compactified his life into those few years. You remember how little he had time left. So I'd like to say that I think you, my friends here, many of you from the Indian descent, can be proud to count Ramanujan as one of you. But the fact of the matter is, all of us, members of our species, Homo sapiens, are very grateful to have counted him as one of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that. That was absolutely beautiful. I think all of us learned. Oh, we do have questions. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Can we show the last page, please? Yeah.
Okay.
Instead.
Oh, magic. Later. At the dinner.
He's also a creator of toys. Look up YouTube for Tadashi toys. But a question on Ramanujan. Yeah, here. There's one here.
So for the lay audience, right, people who are not in doing research in mathematics, right, you read about his notebooks and his proofs and everything else. What aspect of his work is like, sort of relevant to research today? In other words, what are people in the PhD departments in maths across the world? What papers of his are relevant today?
Yes. The question is to people who, without actually mentioning any mathematical technicalities, what papers of his, what works of his are relevant to mathematics and perhaps its applications today? And that is, of course, a very, very difficult question to answer because the nature of the subject. But let me say it in two different ways. One of them is kind of a cheap answer. So Ramanujan left lots and lots, and I mean lots of formulas. Yeah. Some of them actually anticipated, some of them rather routinely proved, others completely baffling. And some of those formulas have been used on occasion. For example, Freeman Dyson, in fact, my surrogate father, who passed away not long ago, who was at the Institute of Advanced Studies, said that one of his dreams, he did both mathematics and physics, you see, he's better known as a physicist, is to see one of the Ramanujan's really peculiar formulas applied to a real problem in physics. And so in the, I forget which year, maybe 2000, maybe 20 years or maybe 15 years ago, Oguri, who's a string theorist now at Caltech, actually found an application of one of Ramanujan's formula to work that he was doing at that time in string theory. And it just gave a bunch of numbers, and then the nature of those numbers were not really understood until 20 years later, and 20 years later, they turned out to reveal some hidden symmetry of the theory. So it comes up in strange ways. And the second answer, which is a little less cheap, which goes deeper, is illustrated in the first one. So Ramanujan's contribution is quite different from the ordinary mathematician's contribution of any age. So you see, all of us come from some tradition, and we go to graduate school, we learn the tricks of the trade, and we live in some theoretical world. Yes? So we have lots and lots, we know lots and lots of stuff of modern mathematics, and we know this theory, that theory, and we work within a formalism. We sort of add some more pieces to the huge construction that is going on in the mathematical world from the past, and we continue into the future. But Ramanujan often seems to work outside those theories, big theories. So he just discovers, if you like, raw phenomena, yeah, facts which don't seem to fit anywhere for the time being. And then a long, long time afterwards, they are discovered to fit somewhere, and it just unravels and illuminates a whole area that had been discovered since. And sometimes they're still waiting to fit somewhere. So that's kind of the contribution. So we really don't know whether, but they have been actually used outside pure mathematics, if you see what I mean.
So, one last question, and then, yeah.
Ramanujan said that many of his things came to him from the goddess, right? His mathematic formula. How is that received by the mathematics community?
And the question is, Ramanujan went on record saying that many of his discoveries were dictated to him by the goddess of Namagiri from Namakal, and how is that received by the mathematical community? I think it's entirely reasonable in the following sense. So you see, in fact, I have the pleasure of having this discussion with some people during lunchtime. It is known that Debussy, for example, said that, in one morning he wakes up and he's inspired and he already has a composition in his head. Yeah? So that kind of inspiration, something that descends from maybe some deities or some universe, boom, inside your head, seems to happen. So what I mean is music, as well as mathematics, is not all drudgery, and you just add one more piece by just hard calculation, and then boom, and then you keep sort of implementing some pre-programmed sort of incremental research. It's not always like that. There are moments of inspiration. However, have you noticed that those moments of inspiration happen only to people who are very, very technically prepared? Yeah? I mean, I'm musically ignorant. I've never had a symphony happen in my head. Yes? Yes. So this is what happens. So given that observation, I think it's entirely reasonable that Ramanujan had those moments. And we can all, in our modest way, relate to this as well.
Thank you so much. That was incredible.